WikiLeaks is back in the news again. For those who have not watched them, please watch the following previous shows where you will learn that Julian Assange is not and never has been a promoter of truth, nor is he someone who facilitates genuine whistleblowing. He is a US intelligence asset and has been probably since the 1990s. WikiLeaks has two broad roles. The first is to gather intelligence and get a heads up on what material people might be trying to leak. And second, to selectively leak information for a range of psychological operations and warfare, such as demonizing undesirable states, discrediting political targets, promoting fear, and many more. It is very disappointing to see certain alternative media channels actually report the pantomime of Julian Assange's arrest and extraction from the Ecuadorian embassy as some kind of real or important event. WikiLeaks has been a travelling pantomime since it started in 2006, and in 2010 the panto came to the UK. Hooray! So let's look at how this puppet show got to the UK and how the script has played out since then. What I am about to describe regarding the Sweden episode comes from mainstream sources, mainly The Guardian, which I appreciate is not reliable and following an agenda. But for some reason, The Guardian were apparently given intimate details of the Sweden episode. This is quite long and rather smutty, so bear with me and I'll begin. On the 11th of August 2010, Julian Assange visited Stockholm in Sweden for a WikiLeaks conference, and his stay was planned to last for some weeks. While he was there, he was hosted by WikiLeaks supporters. One of them was a 26-year-old woman who let him stay in her flat. She was an organiser of the conference, and during his stay she vacated her flat for the duration of his visit, so he would have the flat to himself. But after he'd been there for 2 nights, she unexpectedly returned to the flat. So that night, Friday the 13th of August 2010, they decided to go out for a meal together. Perhaps I shouldn't assume this, but my guess is she was probably, how can I put this, hot stuff. Oh, you're so sexist, Richard. After the meal, they went back to her flat, where they drank tea and Julian started to stroke her leg. Things progressed, and just as they were getting down to having it off, she insisted that he uses a condom. Julian doesn't like wearing condoms, but he agreed to use one, and I won't go into detail on the rest. In a statement some time later, she claimed that Julian did something to the condom that resulted in it becoming ripped. He then ejaculated without withdrawing. In an interview with the police, Assange said that he did not tear the condom and he was not aware that it had been torn. Note, he does not say the condom did not tear. He says he was not aware it had been torn. I assume from this he means he was not aware during sex it had become torn, because it's blatantly obvious after using a condom whether it's become torn or not. Sorry if you're having your dinner. So she was understandably annoyed because the rubber Johnny somehow got torn, and he either didn't notice or just didn't stop. So it's not his wiki that leaks, it's his willy that leaks. After this hiccup, Assange continued to stay in her flat and slept in her bed for a whole week. The morning after the condom incident, on Saturday the 14th of August, Assange spoke at the WikiLeaks conference, which had been organised by her. One question that enters my mind is, why did the woman, who vacated her flat for Julian to use, decide to return? Did she offer Assange the empty flat so he would be more likely to agree to stay with her? While at the conference, Julian met another woman, a 31-year-old this time, presumably a WikiLeaks fan, and in the afternoon they went to the cinema together. They sat in the back row and, according to statements during the film, engaged in sexual activity. On that Saturday evening, the first woman held a WikiLeaks party in the flat where Julian was staying, which Julian and others attended. Now, the following Monday, Julian got a call from the second woman, who arranged to meet him late that evening, and the pair went back to her flat, which is about an hour's drive from the flat where he was staying. He doesn't waste any time. As the two were about to have it off, she made it clear she didn't want unprotected sex either. So apparently Julian, who doesn't like using condoms, lost interest and fell asleep. But they woke up in the middle of the night and had sex using a condom. Maybe he'd had too many ciders and couldn't get a bonk on. Who knows? In the morning, she left him in her bed while she went out to buy some things for breakfast and returned and got back into bed with him. They then had unprotected sex, as she claimed in a statement she couldn't be bothered to tell him to use the condom one more time, as she'd been going on about the condom all night. At this point, Assange is still meant to be staying at the flat belonging to the first woman, and according to her, he tried it on with her again 2 days later on the Wednesday, by approaching her in the flat while he was naked from the waist down. She apparently this time refused his advances. Maybe she was miffed because she didn't know where he'd stayed on the Monday night. Subsequently, the second woman was trying to contact Julian but couldn't get hold of him. She knew he was staying in the other woman's flat and so contacted her by text on the Friday to find out where he was. The two women then decided to meet up and compared notes on the phantom condom dodger. They found out that they'd both had unprotected sex with Julian. Dun dun dun! No! Both women were now very annoyed and wanted Julian to take an STD test, which he initially refused to take. The first woman told him, if you don't get tested, she, the other woman, will go to the police. That afternoon, Assange apparently agreed to have a test, although all the clinics were closed. Later that day, Friday the 20th of August, the two women reported to Swedish police that Assange had engaged in unprotected sexual activity with them that violated the scope of their consent. The police told them that they could not simply tell Assange to take an STD test, but that their statements would be passed to a prosecutor. 2 days later, the chief prosecutor declared, I don't think there is reason to suspect that he has committed rape. However, a representative from the Swedish prosecution authority said Assange remained suspected of molestation. The preliminary investigation concerning suspected rape was discontinued on Tuesday the 25th of August, but 2 days later, on the 27th, the attorney representing the two women requested a review of the prosecutor's decision to terminate the rape part of the investigation. On Tuesday the 30th of August, Assange was questioned by Stockholm police regarding the allegations of sexual molestation. He denied the allegations, saying he had consensual sexual encounters with the two women. Then on Thursday the 1st of September, the Director of Public Prosecution decided to resume preliminary investigation concerning all of the original allegations, including rape. Now, the Director of Public Prosecution contacted Assange's Swedish lawyer on the 22nd of September by text message, asking for an interview with Julian on Tuesday the 28th of September at 5 p.m. Assange then left the country the day before that on Monday the 27th. His Swedish lawyer said that he was difficult to get hold of. Since then, Assange has never returned to Sweden to be interviewed. The Swedish prosecutor knew Assange was not a Swedish national and knew that he was a high-profile figure. So if Assange was genuinely suspected of rape, why did the prosecutor take 3 weeks to request an interview with him? Lessons to be learned. Don't go to Sweden to have it off with a Swede unless you're prepared to use a Johnny and use it properly. But it does raise a very interesting question. If a woman agrees to have sex and makes it clear she wants to use a condom, if the condom is removed or deliberately damaged during sex and the woman doesn't realise, does this constitute rape? I am no expert on these matters. I would say if a condom is tampered with or deliberately removed by one of the parties, usually the man because he's the one wearing it, then this is a crime. The woman said Julian did something to the condom, implying he deliberately damaged it because he did not want to use it. If that is true, then I'd say there is a crime being committed. But is it rape? I personally would not describe it as rape, but I do think it constitutes an offence. Difficult to prove, but I think it's an offence. If that is what happened, I'm sure he's not the first man to stick his nail through a rubber johnny in order to increase his satisfaction. Assuming everything I have reported is correct, which of course I cannot be sure of because I wasn't there, apart from Julian's alleged condom tampering, the only part I think which might be fishy is the actions of the first woman. I think it is possible the first woman was a security services agent. As we know from previous Rich Planet shows, Assange is an important intelligence asset and they are known to spy on or keep tabs on their assets. It does not seem like an attempt at entrapment to me. Whether staged or by accident, the Swedish episode was used as an important building block for the WikiLeaks puppet show, which was to follow in the UK and was to last for the best part of a decade. So from this point, the 27th of September 2010, right up to 2019, there has been a complicated, ridiculous legal battle costing hundreds of thousands of pounds, ostensibly trying to get Julian Assange back to Sweden for questioning. A 9-year-long legal battle because someone put their nail through a blob. Throughout this entire period, Assange has lived in the UK, and because of the extradition requested by Sweden, it meant for all of that time he was living under bail conditions, stating that he should reside at Ellingham Hall in Norfolk, wear an electronic tag, and of course, not leave the UK. What a stroke of luck! He was offered free accommodation, yet again, this time at a posh mansion in Norfolk. It's a hard life for fugitives, but not if you're Julian Assange. I'm not going to delve into the owner of this house here, but he was involved in setting up a media organisation in London called the Frontline Club. Do your own research on this because I think there is a lot to be revealed about what the role of the Frontline Club is and what purpose it served. Assange being offered accommodation here is a red flag and shows he has links with the elite. Although I am sure it was very comfortable living in a mansion in Norfolk, it was a bit far off the beaten track to be used as an effective propaganda house. It was too far from the London media, so he was relocated. If you're believing the Pantomime version, the reason given for him relocating in London, and it's amazing that people actually believe this, is as follows. Assange was concerned that the US might come after him for his WikiLeaks activities, so he decided to apply for asylum in another country that would be sympathetic to his WikiLeaks cause. On the 19th of June 2012, Assange was granted temporary asylum by the government of Ecuador. 2 months later, on the 16th of August, this was increased to full asylum by the Ecuadorian government, who said it had granted Assange asylum because it shared his fears of political persecution and the possible consequences of an eventual extradition to the United States. Did they have a crystal ball? Eventual is the key word here, because at that time there was no request from the US to extradite him. In fact, there was no request until 7 years later on the 11th of June 2019. All this is academic, of course, because it was just part of the Pantomime script. The Ecuador Minister for Foreign Affairs, Ricardo Patino, said, "There are serious indications of retaliation from the country or countries that produced the information published by Mr. Assange. Retaliation that could endanger his safety, integrity, and even his life. The evidence shows that if Mr. Assange is extradited to the United States, he wouldn't have a fair trial. It is not at all improbable he could be subjected to cruel and degrading treatment and sentenced to life imprisonment and even capital punishment." Go and study Ecuador-US relations and ask yourself if a country like Ecuador would really piss the US off by doing this. The answer is no, of course they wouldn't. It's just a pantomime script. But let's go along with it as if it were true. Under normal circumstances, being granted asylum by Ecuador would mean Julian would have to live in Ecuador. But because his bail conditions from the Rubber Johnny incident prevented him from leaving the UK, he could not travel to Ecuador, so he had to live in the Ecuadorian embassy in London instead. Hooray, more free accommodation. Yep, he's the 5-star fugitive. It really is a load of bollocks. Can't you see that Ecuador just did a deal with the US? Once he moved into the Ecuadorian embassy, he was, of course, breaking his bail conditions, and because of this, on the 29th of June 2012, an arrest warrant was issued for his arrest. Once he got to the embassy, what was the convenient upshot of all these shenanigans? Julian Assange got a platform, as Andrew Johnson said, literally a platform in London within walking distance of Westminster and MI6 headquarters, where he could stand on his little pantomime stage, a stage from which he could convince a gullible public that his plight was genuine, and from which to roll out more psychological operations and cherry-picked disclosures for his puppet masters at US intelligence. The embassy provided a place where he could be interviewed by controlled opposition journalists to convince everyone WikiLeaks was what they said they were. This pantomime was a long one. Note that in 2013, Sweden tried to drop Assange's extradition. If this had happened, it would have meant Assange was free to go and live in Ecuador and live under asylum protection there, preventing America getting their hands on him via any future extradition request. But the English Crown Prosecution Service dissuaded the Swedish prosecutors from dropping their extradition request. Why, oh why? Ask yourself why. The extradition request had been appealed in multiple different courts in the UK, costing a lot of time and money, and was still not resolved. Surely Sweden's wish to drop the extradition request for a Rubber Johnny incident should have been welcomed by the UK's CPS. But oh no, there was a political decision to persuade the Swedish prosecutor not to drop the request. Someone in the UK wanted to keep him there on his pantomime stage, as it turned out, for a further 6 years. On the 19th of May 2017, the Swedish authorities suspended their investigation against Assange and officially revoked his arrest warrant in Sweden. Now, jumping forward to 2019, here is an article from the 11th of March, which states that the International Monetary Fund Executive Board approved $4.2 billion extended fund facility for Ecuador. Exactly 1 month after being given this money, on the 11th of April 2019, Ecuador revoked Julian Assange's diplomatic status. Why would Ecuador do that? What about the statements they made in 2012 that they shared his fears of political persecution, degrading treatment, life imprisonment, or even capital punishment? Were the Ecuador government being rewarded with $4.2 billion for playing their part in the pantomime? Following this, you may recall, to huge media coverage, the Pantomime embarked on a new phase when Julian Assange was arrested and dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy. The script said he should also grow a beard. Shortly after this, in May 2019, the Pantomime script said that the Swedish Rubber Johnny case should be reopened again after it had been closed 2 years earlier. The Pantomime wants you to believe that people are upset about Julian's arrest. You know, people who believe in truth and liberty. Those sort of people. I'm tempted to name names here, but I won't. I'll let you figure it out for yourself. Some of them are so upset at the Ecuadorian government's decision that they went to the Ecuadorian embassy to protest and camped outside the front door in tents on the pavement. What a coincidence that every single protester brought exactly the same type of orange tent. Isn't that strange? Not only did they all bring the same tent, but they all look brand spanking new. Did all the protesters go down to the camping shop together and buy a job lot of brand new orange tents? No, of course not. These tents are all the same because these are not real protesters. They are actors taking part in a pantomime, and the tents are just props on a stage. The pantomime needs you to believe that people are protesting to make the whole charade seem real. And consider this. He started breaking his bail conditions on the 19th of June 2012, so it only took them 7 years to find and arrest him. 7 years, folks. Are you believing that? Now, they can't just end the pantomime by closing the curtains. So in the next act, he has to be given a prison sentence for breaking his bail conditions and made to serve a 50-week stretch in Belmarsh prison. But there's video footage from a mobile phone of him in Belmarsh, Richard. I'm not saying he didn't live in Belmarsh for a bit. I am saying he is a tool in a pantomime. Does anyone seriously believe that they have been unable to arrest him for 7 years? That it has taken 7 years to do this? Don't you think there's a reason why they waited 7 years? It was so he could perform further pantomime monologues from his little stage and on TV. So why did they arrest him then, if it's all just a pantomime? Do you remember Osama bin Laden? The other US intelligence asset who they said was behind the 9/11 attacks? Well, he was another pantomime, and pantomimes can only last for so long. After a certain period, more and more people start to realize it's just a pantomime. They brought the Osama bin Laden pantomime to an end after it had lived out its usefulness. And I suspect this is what is happening to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. In July and October of 2017, Rich Planet put out 2 shows where we looked closely at WikiLeaks and showed, I would argue beyond reasonable doubt, that WikiLeaks is not what most people think. I don't know how much damage to the pantomime those programs did. I'd like to think they've contributed in some small way to helping people see that WikiLeaks is all an act, and thus force those who are backstage to bring the panto to an end. There may be a few more acts to follow when he gets extradited to the US, and I ask viewers of alternative media channels who are watching those channels report the Assange pantomime as if it were real, to question those media channels. Why are they reporting the WikiLeaks narrative as though it were true? Why haven't those media channels watched Rich Planet's exposés of Assange or other exposés of Assange and at least passed comment on them? Why are they helping to prop up an actor playing a role in a pantomime? I read recently that when Assange is extradited to the US, he might face up to 5 years in prison. Other articles saying up to 10 years in prison. Up to 5 years. All the song and dance for everything that WikiLeaks has supposedly done amounts to up to 5 years. When Gary McKinnon was facing extradition to the US, he faced a possible 60 to 70 years for downloading US Navy spreadsheets and other material from his bedroom in North London. Remember, if you're going to ravish a Swede, make sure you use a condom.